The thing that is most exciting for me is the thing that gets me up in the morning is like, who do I get to talk to? Who do I get to meet? Who do I get to engage with? I surround myself with inspiring people.
Podcast Junkies, episode 189, 1 away from 190, which means 10 away from 200. See? Math skills. Awesome. I'm your host, Harry Duran. For all these years, if you're new to podcasting, if you're new to the podcast, this is the show where I talk to folks who have amazing podcast shows. We dig deep into what made them start the show, why the heck they would want to start a podcast, what they were thinking, and why they continue with it, and more importantly, what makes them tick, and why they have the wonderful lives that they do. And it's my amazing opportunity to have conversations every week with people. And this is some of my most favorite times of the day, that hour I get to spend with the hosts on the show. In case you missed last week's episode, we got a bit personal. We talked about the importance of seeking out a therapist when you're having challenging times, and that was with Greg Clunis, host of Tiny Leaps and Big Changes. Greg and I had known each other and met each other probably 3 years back, around the time that I actually started Podcast Junkies, courtesy of a Chris Cerrone meetup. Shout out to Chris. Guest number 9 and 50. And we had just a long overdue conversation with Greg. I'm glad with the success that he's having with his show. It's been amazing to see how many different things he tried podcast-wise before he landed on this amazing program, Tiny Leaps and Big Changes, episode 188. Make sure you check that one out. This week, another fantastic guest and another great friend, Kyle Gray. He's the creator of the Story Engine and the Story Engine podcast. He's an epic content creator. He is probably one of the best people that I know that knows how to write those long-form blog posts that are super engaging, super content-rich, a lot of backlinks, a lot of compelling information, gets people to read every single line on the blog post, and it keeps you coming back for more. And I've always been fascinated by people that can do that, and I don't think I know of anyone who does that better than Kyle. And we've met a while ago. We'll tell the story in a couple of minutes, but we reconnected at a conference, and it's just been great to see him start his own show. So we actually get into the background of Kyle prior to podcasting, and we talk about the early stages of the show, the differences between creating content via the written word versus the spoken word, how he uses what he calls the harvest method to help collaborate with people to get them interested in the post, and also to bring people in on the collaboration of the post. And we link to all these amazing posts in the show notes, so don't worry about that. He talks about the importance of continuously adding value and how he's grown as a host and an interviewer. He helps us understand where to draw boundaries with guests, which I think is a very important topic for hosts to be cognizant of. Some of the tools that I use when interviewing podcasts we touch on, and techniques that Kyle uses while producing his podcast. We talk about how he continuously updates his content and touch upon his educational and travel background, and touch upon the couple of books that he's written, because not only is he an epic blog post writer, but he's also an established author, and he's working on book 3. So really great, content-rich, show notes-rich episode. I think you're really, really going to love this, and I'm looking forward to your feedback on it. Full show notes. We put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Maybe not so much blood. That's a little weird. But but a lot of love into the show notes. So please check them out, podcastjunkies.com/189. This episode is brought to you by Focusrite. They continue to be a sponsor of the podcast, and I can't say enough good things about them. I'm in love with the Focusrite 2i2, the Scarlet 2i2, aka the little red box, as one of my clients referred to it. And it just sits here on my desk as I record this episode in my parents' house in Yonkers, New York, visiting here for the week, and I'm going to be taking it on the road with me. I now have the Shure SM7B going into the Focusrite, and the Shure is a bit of a gain-hungry microphone. So I've got the FET head, which boosts the signal, and that's going into the Focusrite. And the Focusrite gives me a ton of control, not only over the volume, but also over the headset. And so when I'm on calls with clients, when I'm on calls recording these intros and outros, it's nice to have that control, and it's just clean sound. So can't say enough enough good things about the Focusrite Scarlett 2i 2. Highly recommended if you're just getting started with your show. Quick promo for my newest show. It's called Podcasting for Thought Leaders, tentative title. I may change that, but for now, that's what it's called, Podcasting for Thought Leaders. So look for it in the iTunes store, Apple Podcast. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. It's my new show to support my business Fullcast, and it's a weekly recap of all things that are happening in the podcasting world. There's so many newsletters coming out about podcasting that it's crazy. And for me to stay on top of it, and what I wanted to do is give my take on the news, pull out the tidbits that are relevant for folks that are interested in the podcasting space or have a podcast or are using a podcast to grow their business. And all those things are helpful. And so I'm going to consolidate that, try to keep that to about 15 minutes and try to get that out to you every Friday. It's actually going to go out on Thursday this week because I'm traveling. So check that out, Podcasting for Thought Leaders. Okay, enough of that. Let's get into this amazing interview with Kyle. So Kyle Gray, host of the Story Engine podcast, thank you so much for being my friend, and thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Junkies.
It's a big honor, Harry. I wouldn't have a podcast if it weren't for you and your encouragement and your advice over these last couple of years. So, and it's been an incredible experience since starting it over this last half year. So thank you so much, just right off the bat.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, as you might imagine, I've become the podcasting evangelist, and when we were talking about it, you are the king of content creation, and we'll get into a little bit of your backstory in a little bit. But I knew that content is podcasting is just content creation in a verbal form, and I think I had the feeling that you would take to it pretty quickly. So I'm glad to see how quickly you've just acclimated to it and you've gotten comfortable. And I was just listening to a little bit of the interview with James Schramko, which also brings everything sort of full circle, because James, for me as well, and you mentioned in your episode, is one of the earliest connections I had into the digital marketing world. He's one of the first memberships I paid for. I think it was the quarterly membership or something like that. And so you having him on must have been special as well. So let's backtrack a little bit and let's talk about your earliest recollection of when we first met.
So when we first met, and it ties back into James as well, I was working for WP Curve, which was a startup founded by Dan Norris, who is a prolific author, 7-day startup, content machine.
And also guest number 2 on Podcast Junkies.
Guest number 2 on Podcast Junkies. So yes, the prolific content creator. And also more recently, very successful brewery owner. True. But anyway, I was working for him, and Dan had been creating a lot of content and growing his startup WP Curve. The demands of the startup started growing faster and faster, and he needed some help to be able to free up time in other areas of the business. So he brought me on to start telling WP Curve's story and creating useful content for its audience. Through that process, one of the things I was doing was just getting on the phone with some of our best customers or some of our most engaged people in our audience, which you were one of them. And I can remember actually sitting in a Starbucks, having a call with you and just chatting over some of the stuff you were working on, what you were excited about, what you were doing, and we were talking about Podcast Junkies, because at the time WP Curve was helping you guys maintain the WordPress site.
That's right.
For those. And so, that's how we first connected. And it must have been maybe a year, probably at least a year later, where we bumped into each other at an event called Reach Academy Live. And I remember hearing your smooth radio voice, just getting up and getting in front of the stage and kind of talking about your experience at the event. And I was like, I know that guy. And so just ran over and talked to you. And which was the beginning of an amazing friendship and tons of different adventures in each of our businesses.
Yeah, it was so exciting. Adventure Reach, for those that don't know, is run by Pete Vargas and team. And it's a platform for helping you become a better speaker. And I think at the time, Pete had come to an event run by Dan Martell in Toronto, and he showed up to support him. And I said, "Who's this Pete Vargas guy?" And then I was like, "Well, I want to learn how to be a better speaker." And I signed up, and then putting a face to the name, because I don't think we'd had a video chat
No.
at that point. We were just it's just been an email. So I was like, "Oh, the Kyle Gray." And then we sort of found our little rat pack there, and a group of friends that kept connected over the years, and we've been just helping and supporting each other ever since. And it's been exciting to support you. And as you got started with the podcast, I thought I gave you the microphone recommendation, which I think you're using now, the ATR 2100.
Yes, sir.
And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the work you were doing just slightly before you got, the podcast bug was kicking in. What were you working on at the time, and how you were thinking that maybe a podcast could complement that?
Definitely. So before I start talking about some of the work, there were definitely at least 2 non-starting podcast attempts in my life before the Story Engine podcast really took off. The first was actually working right away with WP Curve. Kind of our first month there, my job was to not only create tons of content for the audience, but also create a podcast, have a weekly podcast. And it was just a little bit too much to take on all at the very beginning of joining this startup and where I was in my current skill set and journey. It's evolved a lot since then. But
what year was that?
That would have been end of 2014.
Okay.
I interviewed one person. His name was Brennan Byrne. And it just didn't feel super strong yet. We kind of got hung up in a lot of the minor things that I think is pretty common, like, oh, what's the opening track going to be? And, what is the perfect introduction? And who's going to do the voiceover for it? Blah, blah, blah. All the details. It's like the same thing when new business owners get so hung up on their logo,
Yeah, or they get business cards and they incorporate and they get
exactly
all the stuff that has nothing to do with actually selling something and getting paid for it.
Yeah, but it feels like stuff. But anyway, so that was the first attempt, and then more to your question of what was I doing before my podcast? I do a lot of marketing around the areas of storytelling. For a long time, I was focused on creating great blog content. And helping other companies develop strategies for creating great blog content and building teams for that, and making it so that they can scalably grow this so that it's not dependent on one single person. And over the years, it's evolved more from how do we create a content strategy for the long game to how do we create content that's going to get you results quickly, build a story around that, and then create a system that you can consistently start selling with. And so probably when before I was in the podcast and as I was creating the podcast, I was slowly transitioning into storytelling and building sales funnels for various groups. Most recently, I've been really focused in the health and wellness space, which was probably, this was something I really started to work on a lot in 2018, narrowing down the audience and using my own story to connect with them in a unique way. So I started creating the podcast, this podcast in mid 2018. And at first, even though, I'll tell you about my second non-starter, which was when we were masterminding together, you had really encouraged me to create one. And I started by just trying to create these 5 to 10 minute episodes. And I spent a lot of time, I'm a writer by trade. And so I was trying to write out the script and then speak it. And I also tried to do everything myself at first, which was totally bad move.
Which most podcasters are apt to do because they're all getting started solo. So and that's the way you learn too.
Absolutely. So it was definitely a learning experience. But I can remember one moment in particular. We have another mutual friend named Ree Perez, who's a great branding strategist, and I had a phone call scheduled with him. But I can remember him calling me. And I was totally taken by surprise by this because I was in GarageBand trying to edit, cut out every little and ah in my podcast episode. And it was just driving me nuts. And I was so flustered, forgot that I had a call. He calls me up and I'm just like halfway crazy. And I'm just like, oh my God, I tell you what's going on here. And he's like, well, I'll call you back and we could talk another time, because I was just loopy. I've been known, and like we've said before, I'm good at creating systems and processes to make a lot of these tasks that I don't want to do very or like outsourced to somebody else, so I don't have to worry about those things. And that was the big thing in the big difference in the success of the Story Engine podcast, which was simply, having somebody help me edit the audio, send the audio to Rev to be transcribed, and putting it together into WordPress with nice images and quotes and all these things, which is nowadays I just have to hop on the phone and do an interview, and then I'm all set with that. The interesting thing, when I started this podcast, I didn't have a launch date. I didn't have any of the music or any of those things that I was talking about together. All I did was I put together a landing page that talked a little bit about the podcast, said I have a list of this many people who want to hear you, and I put a nice video on it. And with that, just started reaching out to people who I wanted to talk to for an hour. And there's a mysterious effect that happens. You can call up influencers, anyone you want, and you can say, hey, can I talk to you for an hour? And they're going to be like, no. But if you say, hey, I have a podcast, can I talk to you for an hour? They'll say yes.
Magically, that hour opens up.
Yeah. Even without no podcast launch, they could have done their due diligence on me. They would have seen at least a good looking website with lots of content, but no podcast stuff yet. But really, nobody had any problems with that. And started collecting. I maybe collected 12 to 15 interviews because I just wanted to talk to people that were interesting to me and create those opportunities. That's what has always turned me on about podcasting anyway. So once I got to that amount, then I was like, okay, let's start taking this seriously. So I picked out my 7 favorite episodes and then started the process of getting them edited and getting them batched up. And there was a lot of trial and error, but ended up launching, the podcast with 7 episodes and an episode 0. Again, one of your awesome recommendations. Just started, kept the thing rolling. And now I think we're at, I think James Schramko is episode 25 or 26 or something,
Wow.
At least of the interviews. And I've done about 5 or 6 more mini episodes, which were similar to the format I originally tried to work in, but it's become a lot better and a lot easier with practice and time.
So this is interesting because you're a prolific content creator when it comes to the written word. And for those of you that are not familiar with long form blog posts, this is exactly what you are. That's your genius because they're just the epically researched with backlinks and super SEO friendly, tagging people, mentioning people. And I know you also have a strategy for how you share those blog posts. So maybe for the benefit of the listener, we can do a little quick 101 on best practices if anyone wants to do something like that. But I'm wondering how it's been different for you for someone who's created so much content and you've also written books as well, and we can talk about those. So I'm making notes of all the things we got to come back to. But for someone that's created that much content in written form, how has it been to, how do you see, or do you anything in terms of how now you're also creating content? 25, 26 episodes is nothing to sneeze at. But this is all spoken. And it's all interviews and it's all conversations.
Yeah. So these questions tie in really nicely together. So what I was doing with long form content, I haven't been doing as much long form blog posts on my site, but I've actually been doing even working on longer form content, and have a book that's about 90-ish% done that I'm hoping to release late next quarter, or this quarter 1 of 2019. And
what's
called Selling with Story.
Got
So
it.
it'll be the yin to the yang of my first book, or called The Story Engine, which is kind of my process for capturing your story and building a scalable marketing campaign around it. This one, again, is about how do you get clear on your story fast? How do you translate that into a compelling offer? And how do you start selling that scalably? So driving revenue to the business quick. So they pair together nicely. But anyway, through my long form, I've always loved content because of the relationship building aspects. Podcasts are excellent at this, but there are ways to do this with long form content. And I can tell you about I have a blog post called The Harvest Method, or this is kind of a process, which is about creating great content and then leveraging the content you create to start building relationships. For a lot of people, they assume that once you finish a blog post, then it's done forever, which is usually the case as far as audio or visual content goes, but you can consistently update and expand written content infinitely, which creates a lot of opportunities. If you've got a good long form post that has traction and has interesting ideas, you can use that as a tool to reach out to people and say, hey, I quoted you in this post, or hey, I'd like to quote you in this post. Can we hop on a call and do a quick interview? Is there anything I can link to of yours? Or I noticed you have this thing and I mentioned you in here. And with just that simple collaboration, it's a really nice, no cost of entry way to kind of get in the door and start a conversation with somebody, which can transform into all kinds of things. It can, here's one great example. In writing this blog post, The Harvest Method, I published it, and a couple of weeks later, I found a friend of mine, Tyler Basu from Thinkific, posted on Facebook saying, how do you build relationships with people? Or how do you create authentic relationships? Something like that. Anyway, it was very much in line with this article I was writing, and people were just comments were coming down the pipe. And I started reaching out to some of the people that were commenting with their really great responses. And I was like, hey, I've got this great blog post, but it's missing exactly what you said. I'm wondering if I can quote you in that. And I did that with 3 or 4 people. A couple of them were with Thinkific. So we had built up that relationship, started communicating a little bit. And then all of a sudden, we both got wind that we were going to be at the Traffic and Conversions Conference in San Diego.
Yep.
And so we had set up a lunch. And we're now talking together at lunch, and have since done a lot of different collaborations where I've built my course on Thinkific. I have gotten introduced to new podcast guests, new joint venture partners, thanks to Tyler and the amazing guys I met at Thinkific, and thanks to that lunch, which all started with just using the Harvest Method to, again, identify a way that I could add value to somebody through my content, and reaching out and collaborating.
That's interesting, because a lot of times when people think about those posts, they might have half of it right, and they said, "Oh, there's a post where they're talking about something that's related to something I did, so I'm going to say, hey, this is right up my alley, and I talked about this in my post. You should go read it." And what you did, it was actually found a way to demonstrate that what they were adding to the conversation is something that would add value to what you were working on. And so you were saying, hey, what you said is really valuable, and I think it would make my content even better. And I think that's that extra step that really allows people to feel valued for what they're doing, and also makes it feel like you're not trying to like just poach the traffic, that Tyler had started. And definitely I agree with what you're saying about the Thinkific guys, because I'm been always in conversations with them, Tyler and Rob Balasabas as well. It's a really great guy. And so, I mean, my course as well is on Thinkific, so nothing but good things to say about them. But I think that approach of continuing to add, multiple layers of value is something that it sounds like you've had as a way you do business for a long time.
Absolutely. I think that's really at the core of what I'm doing. And, we can look at the opposite approach where I get emails almost every day. And this is what 99% of people do instead. They'll say, hey, I saw you have a blog post and I have similar content, that talks about the same stuff. Will you link to my stuff in your blog post? It's like, hey, I've never met you. I have no idea who you are. I don't even want to take the time to research, what you're doing to see, because you haven't offered anything to me. And so that's kind of the world that I see a lot of these people doing. And maybe it must be successful sometimes, because that somebody's got to be biting, because there's so many of these emails going around, or somebody who's really good at selling this process as something that works.
Mm-hmm.
And podcasting has really been very similar to that, where I always try to frame it, whether I'm getting on other people's podcasts or inviting people onto my own show. How can I add value to my audience, or how can I add value to the guest? And how can I make this a really incredible thing? And tying back into nice written content, one of the things I've done or was doing previously, before I actually had a podcast, was interviewing people for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then taking that interview and transcribing it into a written post, and then publishing that, kind of featuring them as the main person. And so instead of, I've just now modified that. Going through that a couple of times, I was like, this is pretty much a podcast. I actually could do a podcast more easy than this.
Yeah.
So instead, now I've taken those interviews. I still transcribe them, because I think it's really good to, especially for a 30 or 40 minute interview, that turns into a lot of words. And so, incorporating that into the kind of the long form content I'm already creating, and having good audio to accompany that, and even a little bit of video. I like to take short clips from my interviews, which I do over Zoom, and use that for social media, whether it's on Instagram or LinkedIn, or just embedding it right into the post itself.
How have you grown so far, with the episodes that you have under your belt? When you got started, having you've had some of these conversations before, so you were not new to interviewing folks, but do you feel like you've grown as a host and as an interviewer as the show's progressed?
I think so. It's really, I kind of have a style of trying to be really, really present in the moment. I don't do a lot of preparation up front, but I just listen intensely and follow my curiosity with that. And I think it's helped me be more present. I've tried to make sure that my space where I record and kind of everything's distraction free, so that I can just be there for that person. And I think that it's been a skill that, I've been developing through this and getting better at. Again, like, one of the things I want to continue to work on is maybe there's always a balance to keep, but you want to try to ask questions that are a little bit different, that are a little bit unique. And often those are questions that are also sometimes could possibly be uncomfortable or a little bit risky. And so bringing those questions forward in a non-threatening way that gets people to open up in unique ways.
Yeah, and a lot of the things you're saying, regular listeners will resonate with, and it'll sound familiar, because it's something just I keep hammering home, this idea of focusing as much attention onto your guest as possible, and the conversation will flow naturally. I mean, we were chatting for almost half an hour before we even got started recording here.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of making this conversational as possible, never forgetting the intimate medium that we're leveraging here. A lot, 90% of people are going to be consuming this on earbuds. And so to the extent that you can feel like you're having a conversation and you're talking into people's ears, I think that's where they start to develop a connection to you as a host. And, I don't know if you're far enough along for people to have started giving you feedback on the episodes, but, if you start doing it and you keep doing it enough, and you start letting people into your personal life a little bit. So in your intros and saying, hey, we're going to start the show, and it's been an interesting week so far, and this is what I'm working on. And, they start to know the name of your dog, and they start to know little things about your life. And it's a funny experience. And And I'm happy that we can now call each other podcasters, and you're now in that realm, and I'm happy to see the progress that you've made so far.
I love that. And there's a lot to unpack there. One of the things I've been trying to, I just did a mini episode yesterday about my 2018 year in review. And like we were talking about on before we started recording and on this, I want to bring more ownership and more of myself and more of my personality into everything I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the mini episodes talking about me and what's going on in my business have been a great outlet for that. And they do resonate with people. I can see that in the stats. Also, another thing that you were saying that really has struck me, especially recently, is also understanding where to draw boundaries with your guests, or how to protect your audience, because there's been a couple of times where guests just simply, I don't know, the conversation hasn't been that good or that interesting, and I don't feel like there's anything that fresh. Or there's been times where maybe I'm not sure if the guest was necessarily like inexperienced in podcasting, or they did have some kind of stuff going on in their lives, but I've hopped on to interview calls where they're driving in their car and they expect to be able to do a podcast, be a podcast guest while driving, and I'm like, no, that's not going to work. And being able to, again, set up boundaries and draw the limits and make sure that you put your audience first. Though I love to build relationships with my guests, and it's one of my favorite parts of it, it will never come at the expense of the relationship with my audience and the trust that I've created there.
Yeah, that's super important, Kyle, because I think most people take that stuff for granted, and I think there's a lot to be done. I always talk about this idea of treating your guests like gold, but also ensuring that the listener is having an experience where they feel like you've taken the time to be considerate about what they're listening to. The newest number, I think, is 620,000 podcasts in Apple iTunes, and with so much noise out there, people are very discriminating about what they listen to, and you don't want to waste people's time, because I know that if I listen, I give a new podcast maybe a couple of minutes at 2x on my podcatcher, and then I'm like, or maybe it's hard for me to find a new show, because I know the ones that I've put my trust in, week in and week out, and those are my go-tos. And so for anyone else to crack that circle and just, it would have to be either a friend's show. There's nothing better than for me to listen to a friend that's a host interviewing someone who is also a friend. So that's sort of why I was listening to yours with James, because I know both of them, and I just love that part of it. And it's that intimacy, and hoping to learn something and you actually learn more about your friends when you listen to that. So just that natural curiosity is, I think, something you were alluding to, and just treating the listener's time with respect. And I love the fact that if people aren't coming prepared and aren't coming to give them the best version of themselves on your show, that they don't make the cut, and they're not going to be an episode on the Story Engine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes more than having some big claim to fame, or just because you have a really cool business or a really cool story or some kind of successful thing. If you don't show up ready to go, it won't cut it.
Yeah. One of the things I've been doing is I've put it on my page now. So if you go to fullcast.co/interview prep, it's just a list of things you can send a guest ahead of time to kind of have them be ready for the show. And so that might be some ideas we can talk about after as well. And I'll put the link in the show notes as well. But it's just this idea of like, hey, you're going to come on, like have some water handy. Like if you're going to be in a loud environment and you don't have a microphone, because I'm grateful that I have a show about podcasting where I interview podcasters. So 99 times out of 100, they're going to have a good mic. So, but I know that's not the case for most podcasters, but just letting them know, hey, if you're not going to have a mic, then at least earbuds at the very least, because this idea of talking into your laptop is like the worst thing. I mean, probably driving their car is the worst.
Yeah.
But talking into your laptop is like second worst, because you get that feedback, and sometimes that feedback makes it into your audio. So there's that audio bleed. And just I found a tool called Trip Mode. If you go to tripmode.ch, it actually toggles apps that are using the internet. And right before we jumped on this call, I turned mine on. And so the only thing that's using the internet right now is Chrome.
Uh-huh.
So Dropbox, iTunes, iCloud, all these little apps now, they all have like these little Evernote. They all have this little internet connection. And when you're on a call like this, using Squadcast, then we every little degradation to the internet signal is going to affect the quality of the call. So that's
That
just
is a
again,
great one.
yeah. So
Yeah,
little things like that, and so trip mode and just kind of that whole. What you want to do is set your guests up, to let them know like what they're coming to, and it's like, okay, this is what's going to happen, and it just establishes you as a host as having like being professional and then just welcoming them onto your stage. I know at Advanced Reach we talked about the importance of offline and online stages, and I really hammer home this idea. Once I heard that, I was like, yes, this makes sense. Like this podcast is my stage, and you're a guest on it, and then in your podcast, you're inviting people onto your stage, and so there's if you were to have a live event and you would have 10 speakers, you would make sure that before they came on, they knew what they were getting into. So a little bit of that goes a long way to making sure. And you've already got that filter in place, that discernment filter. So, I get the sense that you're already thinking about your listeners when you're having guests, and even probably as you're starting to schedule new guests as well.
definitely. And also, I have this in mind. I got a lot of experience being a guest on podcasts before I started
Mhm.
my own. And I'm aware of all of these things in my outreach. Like I'll say, hey, to podcasts that I reach out to, I have an ATR 2100 mic. Like I know what a good podcast is like, and I know what your expectations are. So I'm going to show up ready to play at the level of quality that you really want, which I think makes a big difference in my ability to get on shows, because they know that I take them seriously and respect them and want to create quality with them.
Do you actually mention that you have the mic?
Absolutely. I have I have a landing page that
Yeah.
invites people onto my show. I have a landing page like it's almost like a speaker one sheet, which is something that we talked about and worked on in Advance Your Reach. But it's a landing page that has a short bio of me, a video of me talking, addressing the podcaster. Hey, thank you so much for creating what you've done. I know how much work and love goes into creating a great show, and here's how I can help your audience with these things. So I have a video auto plays. Then I have kind of like popular topics that I speak on. And I even have this funny little button. It's a little hokey, but I've used HTML code so that when people click the button, it automatically creates a pre-populated email with me as the recipient and saying like, I want you on the show in the subject line, and then something in the body that says, when can we start? So it's kind of funny. I don't know if I don't know if people actually click
Yeah.
on that button, but it's like a little funny thing. But just having the video together, the video I see as like it's a little mini audition, to let me onto their show. So if I can show up well in that quick video and then show them again, have a list of little things that how I can say. I also say I'll promote your show to my list of people, which has been something I've been learning recently, is like surprisingly challenged sometimes to get your guests to actually promote the interview. But I also understand, as somebody who's been a guest on many shows, that it's difficult to promote yourself or to promote when you go on other podcasts sometimes, because a lot of the times the things you're saying, if you're pretty comfortable with the same story and the same topics, you'll overlap over and over again. And so it's not always poignant to keep saying I've been on all these different podcasts. So there's a balance to keep there for people who want to be guests and people who want to be hosts. It's an interesting thing seeing both sides of the equation.
Well, we definitely want to link to that page. I want listeners to get a peek at that.
You got it. Yeah.
So make
I'm
sure,
happy to share that one.
send that over. We're going to make sure or the other thing we're going to make sure we include is your link to the Harvest Method post. So I just want to, kind of lean into your expertise a little bit. So obviously it's a long form blog post, and it would take probably, how long do you think it would take to read that thing?
It's maybe, if you were just reading through it, it's maybe a 25 minute read.
So I want to entice people to go check it out, and we'll provide the link to that as well. But just to kind of talk about what your genius is, can you talk about the high points of why you created that post, and what are some of the key takeaways from there for folks that are just interested in this idea of, creating some of them more, because people know they should be creating blog posts and they know they should be connecting with folks, but I don't think they've ever put all the pieces together like I've seen you do wonderfully. So, and I think this, what you talked about in the blog post is relevant. So maybe just the high points to get people interested to look into it more.
Absolutely. So it's a 4-step process in the harvest method. And again, before I get into the details of the process, I've mentioned this before, but the thing about creating content, whether it's podcasts or videos or blog posts or speeches or whatever I'm making, the thing that is most exciting for me is the thing that gets me up in the morning is like, who do I get to talk to? Who do I get to meet? Who do I get to engage with? I surround myself with inspiring people. And actually, like, there's been times that I've actually shared with you on masterminds occasionally where I've been like feeling really down and not sure if I want to keep going in entrepreneurship. But when I'm like, okay, I'm going to turn away, get a job or whatever. Hasn't happened for a while, thankfully. But when I'm like standing on that edge, I'm like, well, if I get a job, then I'm going to have to like be stuck to that and I won't get to meet and engage with cool people anymore. And that would be a tragedy. I'm like, I can't go that way. Okay. Keep trucking on.
Yeah.
So people don't realize, I think, when creating content, they're very focused on building an audience, which is so important. Can't express that enough. But people really miss out on like who you connect with, the friends you make, the guests, the people you feature, and how do you use that to open new doors for other collaborations. And so that's what this process is all about. And so if you can do this maybe a little less effectively in video and audio, but really, really well in written content. But this harvest method is just a way to start to open up doors to really interesting people. And I've got a great story about how I did this with Seth Godin to kind of cap it off. But first, step 1 is plow the field. You've got to understand, what you're creating, what you want to create, and then start to build up a little bit of contact with people, or like know who's out there and how to reach out to them and what their needs are, so that you can see once you understand the landscape of who and what's going on, then you can start putting the pieces together. Then there's planting the seed, and that's reaching out to somebody and saying, again, like I was mentioning before, hey, I know that you're brilliant in this. I'm creating this content around this. Can I feature you? Can I I want to do something with you. So that's the beginning of the outreach, and you want to make sure that your outreach is strong. One of the best ways that our best tools I have for outreach is still BombBomb. I love it. It's a video email tool where you can just send a quick 1-minute video embedded with an email that gives you a little bit more of a human touch, especially in the inbox.
Yeah, I know we've talked about that. That was a great tip that I learned at Advance Your Reach. Does that create an animated GIF in the email? Because the challenges with video is always that people don't know it's a video, so you've kind of induced people into clicking it because they know it's going to be a video. But
it does have a little bit of an animated GIF
okay.
Where you see that, and there's a couple of frames. And what I'll do, which I learned from the BombBomb team themselves, is I have a little whiteboard. It's somewhere away from my screen right now. But I take my whiteboard and I write, hey, Tom, or whoever I'm reaching out to, and just hold it in front of the camera right up to the thing, so they see, oh, this is just for me. Because if they just see it looks like you're talking, but they can't hear anything, they might just think this is a generic video. But when they see the whiteboard, hey, Tom, talking to them, it'll get them to open it. So that's really powerful. So, so step 3 is all about making it as easy as possible for them to say yes. So there's like, if you ask them, can I feature you in this post? Then, if they say yes, well, then they have to think about like, okay, well then what do they want me to say? How much do I have to say? Where do I need to say it? Do I need to write it and send them in a Word document to them? Or so instead you eliminate all of that. So it's just so they know exactly what they need to do and they're totally set. So saying, hey, I would like to interview you. We're going to do a phone call for 15 minutes. Then I'm going to take what we say and I'm going to write that and put it into the post, but I'll share it with you to make sure you're happy with it before. So you make it as easy as possible for them to add their value and add their genius, which makes it pleasant for them to have a part. And then finally, step 4 is harvest and feast. And this is where the really good stuff comes in. You get them into the post and then you make sure that the content they add is useful for them and their audience, and it's useful for you and your audience. So if you haven't published it yet, publish it and get it out in front of people and promote it and get a good response. And if your audience responds and loves what they say, send them like pictures. Sometimes I'll get texts. Like I got a text from one of my friends saying, oh man, I loved when you interviewed Chris Zano on your podcast. It changed my life. I sent Chris the picture of that text because you want to make sure like, oh yeah, this is winning. This is engaging and make it easy for them to share too. Yeah. So you can send them an email saying, hey, I've got this click to tweet if they're into Twitter, or here's a quick little segment here, or here's a couple of things you can share. Make it easy for them to promote it to their audiences too, so that both of you can win. And if you've already published the post, then you really want to make sure it's super easy for them to promote. But the good thing here is like a post that you published a year ago, you can add a little update, add a link from somebody else, somebody new who you've built up a relationship with through this content, and they'll share it again and breathe new life and new traffic into an old post. And you can do that over and over again. There's no word limit. There's no content limit to your long form, blog post. So you can keep doing this and just keep building on the solid content you've already created instead of trying to create new stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm nowhere near as prolific as you when it's come to producing this type of long form content, but I've always been drawn to it. And so the couple of times that I've done it, I've thought about, well, what's a lot of content that I can get into one post? And so one of the earliest ones I did was the exhaustive list of podcasts about podcasting. And now that you mention it, and I did it on Podcast Junkies, and it's probably 2 or 3 years ago, but I mean, occasionally I still see people like, it's one of the most popular, it's one of the longest posts and the closest thing resembling a blog post on my Podcast Junkies site, because the rest are just show notes from the episodes. But I think it's consistently number 1 because it was just a long form read. And what I did that same thing, I reached out to all those podcast hosts. I'm like, hey, I just mentioned your show on this post. And, thinking about what you said, that could still be, I could revisit it and I'm sure some of the shows are gone, and I've already seen on my feed, there's like at least 5 or 10 new shows about podcasting. So that never stops. So I think I'm going to take your advice and see if I could refresh that one. And then the other one was the tools post. I've seen people do this successfully, like the 67 tools I use in my business. And that's a great opportunity because I basically reached out to everyone that I tagged in there, even folks at Evernote. And I tagged them on Twitter. And then I also, if I found an email, I sent them an email. I said, hey, I mentioned you in this write-up of the tools that I use in my business. And I just realized that one's probably like a 1.5 years old as well for Fullcast. So I think those are 2 ideas for me to how to refresh content that's already exists. And obviously it wouldn't be as much work to refresh it as it was to create it.
Absolutely. And you can just put, 2019 in there.
Yeah.
And probably, your podcast about podcast post is old enough that you could, again, just by adding 2019 and changing out 5 to 10, podcasts, it would be fresh for your audience again.
Yeah, it's interesting.
You could promote it internally too.
Do you do the practice where I've seen people sometimes do this either at the beginning or at the end? They sort of do it in italics and like a bracket and be like, update, January 2015, update, December 2016. Do you think that as a best practice that you should let the reader know that it's something that you've added new content to, or just putting it at the bottom, or don't even bother and just say change from 2018 to 2019 in the title?
I think either way is good. I think it depends on, in a list post, I don't think it's necessary.
Okay.
like what you were describing. If perhaps like you were exploring a certain idea and now maybe your opinions have changed or something like that, then maybe there's a little bit more of an
Okay.
appropriate place for a note like that.
And how does it affect SEO if the last time you posted it, it was the 2017 the list of exhaustive podcasts, the exhaustive list of podcasts about podcasting, but now it's 2019, so it's the 2019 list of podcasts. You would actually change the title, and I know we're getting a bit geeky here, but do you actually also change the WordPress slug so that it reflects the new title as well?
Yeah, I would do that. I think adding 2019 is a great way to niche down any keyword. And people are always looking for the freshest content anyway.
Got it.
So by having that, search engines know like they want to see, the new fresh content. So having it updated in there, plus still having all of the backlinks, and you're still collecting all of the backlinks. You're still collecting all of the authority and social signals that have already gone to those posts. And so by updating it, you're just kind of supercharging what you already have and creating even more momentum with it.
Epic. Well, again, like I mentioned, we're going to link to that Epic Harvest Method blog post so people can dive on that. And I encourage and get the listener, if that's one of your goals for 2019, to get a blog post out, read this first and then do it the right way. Because if you're going to take the time to post it, you might as well have it build relationships at the same time and build connections with other people. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering, like, I'm guessing you majored in English in college.
I didn't. I majored in international relations.
Okay.
So I just wanted to figure out how to travel. And that was pretty much my exclusive motivation. It got me into business too.
That's right.
Yeah, I did international studies, studied abroad a lot, did an exchange to Argentina, and did some internships working for a nonprofit in Peru and an airline in Brazil. And I just loved my time spent in South America. And so for a long time, I was like, I've got to figure out how to be able to do this. And I started actually by listening to the Tropical MBA podcast, learning about how these people were building businesses from their laptops. And kind of as I was finishing my master's degree and building up a lot of these skills, I started connecting with some of these people, actually using kind of a harvest method. I was teaching an entrepreneurship class at the University of Utah and said I had a podcast, but it was really, we were doing Google Hangouts at the time. And I just said, hey, I've got a room of 20 students who want to hear from you. Can I interview you for a short time? Interviewed them. One of the people I interviewed turned out to be Dan Norris, and told Dan when he said he was looking for somebody to hire him, I said, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm heading out to Southeast Asia to the Dynamite Circle conference. I know you're going to be there too. And 2 days before I got on the plane to go to Asia with $6,000 in my pocket and I was going to start a business or be damned, I got hired by WP Curve and started the wildest adventure of my life to date. Yeah,
that's so pre James Schramko, my internet marketing goes back to Dynamite Circle as well. That was an earlier. They were talking about James like he was this like God, like he's like, oh my God, James Schramko. And I remember, and a lot of my earlier guests, I mean, I started the podcast when I was in Dynamite Circle. So Chris Chidgey, Jesse Lawler, Smart Drug Smarts, who's been just kicking butt.
Epic, amazing.
Love his podcast. And a couple of other folks just came out, that just made some friendships there as well. So it's interesting because you've got this like love of the written word, and so and you've written a couple of books. So talk a little bit about the books you've written as well, and then talk to me, where that comes from, where this like urge to write, because not everyone has it. And a lot of people think they want to be and can be writers. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, writing is an interesting beast for me. I feel like I got interested in writing, was not an English major, like I said, but doing international studies on both an undergraduate and graduate level, had to write a lot of papers. But I'll tell you, there's a big difference between writing a paper for a professor that will maybe halfway read it once, to writing for thousands and thousands of people and being graded by Twitter and Facebook instead of by a pen. It took a lot of practice. I'm really grateful for the time I spent at WP Curve, because that was pretty much exclusively my job. Was I had to show up and I had to write every day. And that was kind of how I built up that muscle over a year, and spent a lot of time. Was very lucky to have Dan Norris's feedback and guidance through a lot of this content as well, to kind of accelerate that process of really what is great writing. But for my first two books, my first one is called The College Entrepreneur, which is all about how a college student can build a business while they're in school and leverage their university's resources, scholarships, and reputation to graduate with something more than just a degree. And I wrote that one mostly out of kind of like a passion of just like I saw there was kind of a misalignment between what people were expecting to get out of university and what people really were. And I thought that this book could be the bridge. The second one is called The Story Engine, which is all about my process for, again, capturing your story, getting that clear, and then how do you build systems so that you can have people telling your story for you without you kind of getting bogged down in the process. How can you add scale into your content marketing easily? For both of those, I kind of had a fire under my ass. There was either a time crunch or I was going through a challenging time, and I would do miracle morning style writing. So I'd wake up first thing in the morning, and then I had to just get 500 words out. And if I could do 500 words, then I'd be feeling good. And this was actually surprisingly therapeutic, because no matter what was happening during the day, no matter what challenges came my way, I felt a lot better if I would have gotten up early in the morning and just made a little bit of progress on the book. Gave you a reason to wake up early. It gave you a reason to move fast. And again, 500 words. Yeah, it takes practice to even get to that point, but it's not the most overwhelming amount of words. So you can just make a little bit of progress. But if you do that 5 times a week, 500 words times 5, that's 2,500. So times 4 in a month, that's 10,000 words a month. So in 3 to 4 months, you can have a book pretty simply. And that's about how long it took.
For the very few people who haven't heard about Hal Elrod, we'll put a link to his book here, Hal Elrod, Miracle Morning, in the show notes as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I've got to say, like, one of the things that the College Entrepreneur is somewhat successful. It was a good book, good ideas, well reviewed, but the Story Engine has been very, very successful. And one of the reasons why is I'm not going for royalties, or I'm not going for anything like that. Throughout the book, I've added links and resources and downloadable goodies like content strategy templates and scripts and frameworks that can help people go deeper into these topics within each chapter. And so the book has become a lead generation tool, or has helped me grow my list and my audience more than any other tool, more than any other content, more than anything else, which has enabled me to, I think, launch a podcast as successfully as it was, which has enabled me to have an audience and have joint ventures and have kind of the clout and authority I have. And it's all thanks to, again, building in useful tools and resources so that you can capture the emails of your readers. And it also empowered me, instead of trying to have a book that was, again, just earning royalties, I could kind of keep my price low, which meant it sold more, which meant it was more visible on Amazon, which led it to being, it's been a bestseller, it's been out for a little over a year and a half. And for at least a third of that time, it's been a bestseller.
That's awesome.
In several categories.
So there's so much. This is going to be one of those episodes that's chock full of links in the show notes, but it's all great stuff. And so I'm wondering, if you think about your journey and even in the time that we've known you, you said it's funny because you said the book has been out a year and a half. And I remember when you said the book was coming out and that you were working on it. So that's just a testament to, we've been friends even longer than that. But it's been within our circle of entrepreneurial friends, and you said we were in a that we share time in a mastermind, that it's just been exciting to see how your career and your entrepreneurial journey has taken off. And so, kudos to you. I wanted to just let you know publicly that I'm super proud of everything you're doing, and it's very inspirational. And I think it'll inspire a lot of folks here to decide that there's no one way to take this journey, and there's a lot of pitfalls along the way, and we fall on our face a lot, some of which we were talking about prior to jumping on here.
Yeah.
But I think we just have to have the entrepreneurial spirit to just get up and learn from our mistakes and learn from our lessons, and figure out a way to move forward so we can have success in doing something that we're proud of.
I think so. And on this note, I just remembered I had a story about Seth Godin that I didn't share that I think would be a great way to cap it all off. And before I say that, yes, I'm so grateful to have you as a friend, and for all of the influence and wisdom that you've shared with me over the years. It's been an incredible journey, and I look forward to many more. But so this is an excellent case study in the harvest method and being collaborative, and in getting and in podcasting too. If you don't know who Seth Godin is, then you need to do something immediately, because he's one of the true godfathers of marketing. There's a lot of hypey guys out there, but I really think like Seth is truly one of the best out there. And I've read several of his books. He publishes a daily blog post, which is mind-blowing to me. So he's a prolific creator too. And I had noticed Seth had just, it must have been on Twitter or somehow, noticed that he had just barely released a new podcast called Akimbo. It was the day that the podcast had come out. And so I knew Seth is a very busy guy, doesn't respond to everybody's emails. But most people are going to be contacting him about his older stuff or about stuff he's already created. And he is disproportionately excited about his podcast right now because he's just releasing it. So I noticed he had released this podcast episode, listened to the first episode called The Grand Opening or The Grand Closing or something, and I just was really excited about it and wrote out maybe a 1,500 word post on my experience following his ideas that he outlined in the episode, and linked back to the episode, and then promoted that to my list, and also emailed it to him saying, "Hey, Seth, I'm a big fan, loved this episode, just did a write-up about it." And Seth ended up leaving just or replying to the email saying, "Hey, thanks so much for the support," and leaving a comment on the blog post saying, "This was a great post. Thanks for sharing." And though it wasn't like, we're not drinking buddies or anything, but to be able to capture the attention of one of the very, very top tier marketers out there without a lot of effort. It took good timing, but you can do this with the right awareness of where these people are and what they need and what's going on with them right now. And so it opened up a new door, and that can be cultivated and grown from there. And so I just hope that leaves you with some encouragement and some inspiration on how you can really use content in unique ways to open up new doors for your business. Yeah, you were right. That's a perfect bow to this conversation on all the things we were talking about. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Yeah. Just a couple of questions as we wrap up. What's something you've changed your mind about recently? Something I've changed my mind about recently. Ooh, that's a good one. Something I changed my mind about recently. For a long time, I've been very focused on results-oriented stuff, bottom line money. And I didn't think there was a lot of room for like playfulness or bringing in like telling stories about, I love to ski, I love to rock climb, I love to go on adventures and travel. And I didn't think there was a lot of room or a lot of interest for those parts of my life within my business or within what I was doing. And I think that those are really key parts of who I am, and bringing those into fully owning that part of my story within my business and my content and what I create, I think will help people connect with me on a deeper level. And so, bringing that forward and not always trying to be just purely bottom line oriented, I think is something I've changed my mind on recently.
Yeah, that's really important. And we have the beautiful medium of podcasting lets you bring that emotion, lets you bring that personality into it on a episode to episode basis.
Absolutely.
What's the most misunderstood thing about you?
I think at least as far as like the response I get from, some of my old friends, or, a lot of people they see the great content, they see the books, they see all these things, and they just think like, like success is just kind of an automatic thing that's just been, flowing and easy. And I just, hang out and sip on coffee and write blog posts, and then money falls from the skies.
That's not how it works.
Yeah, it's not so much how it works. It's been definitely like an up and down journey. And most of the time I'm just like, I'm just trying to keep everything together. And so I think that that's a little bit of a misunderstood thing. And that's something, again, kind of to the last point, I want to bring more of kind of the struggle and the journey and the process, and trying to be more vulnerable in that as it's happening.
That's really important. Well, brother, thank you so much for making this happen. I think when I knew that you were starting a podcast, I already had put you in the queue. I'm like, okay, as long as he can make it past like the first couple and he's serious about it, I'm going to be inviting him on. So I'm glad we were able to make this happen. I'm so excited. I'm so proud of you with everything you're doing, and you've got the perfect mindset for being a successful podcaster. So congrats on your success. I'm looking forward to what you do with the show.
Thank you so much, Harry, for having me on the show, and for, again, everything. And for everybody out there who's listened to the end, thank you so much. You are an amazing person, and I'm grateful for your time and attention.
Where's the best place for folks to track you down?
You can find me and everything we've talked about probably at thestoryengine.co, just .co.
All right. Well, thanks. And here's to an awesome 29 for us both.
Likewise. 2019. Here we go.
Thank you so much for Kyle to come on the show. Was a treat for all of us. Wouldn't you agree? So much valuable information, especially when it comes to content as it relates to blogs, which we can directly relate to the podcast. So I hope really that you enjoyed that. It's nice to have friends come on that are masters at what they do, and Kyle is no exception. Intro and outro music composed by Cedar and Soil, cedarsoil.com to check out his amazing music. Our sponsors are awesome, and please support them. Focusrite is this week's sponsor, and I can't say enough good things about the Focusrite 2i2. Make sure you check it out. We'll provide a link for that as well if you wanted to see it directly on Amazon. Check out my new show, Podcasting for Thought Leaders. It's another show that gives a weekly recap of everything happening in the world of podcasting. Tune in next week for my conversation with Brian McCullough. He's the host of Tech Meme Ride Home, a daily podcast, again, with a recap of all things tech. So there seems to be a trend about these recap shows. And similar to previous guest, Erica Mandy of The Newsworthy, Brian does the same thing except for tech news, which I've been enjoying as well. You've made it this far. You're no doubt listening for the retention hashtag. It is going to be Story Kyle in honor of the Story Engine. So Story Kyle, one word, hashtag Story Kyle. And you can tag us at podcast_junkies, and Kyle at Kyle the Gray. That's his awesome Twitter handle, Kyle, Kyle, the Gray, all together, one word. Thanks for all you do to support the show. I love you guys. You're awesome. See you next week.